When I reviewed the AOC AG493UCX Black Edition back in 2018, I found it to be one of the best ultra-wide gaming monitors that money could buy. Now we've got its larger sibling, the 49-inch AG493UCX. This is a 1440p 120Hz gaming monitor that might tick a lot of boxes, at least if you can fit it on your desk. Now the monitor doesn't come cheap. It costs around £900 in the UK and around $1,000 in the US. If you're interested in purchasing it, the locally link in the description below will take you to your localized Amazon store. And also down there you'll find a link to my Instagram, and yes, that's a shameless plug, it's at TotallyDubbed. And if you're interested in keeping up with news or reviews on all electric or hybrid vehicles, do check out Totally EV, your support would be equally appreciated. So let's kick things off and talk about what you actually get for that amount of money that you're investing. Well, as I mentioned, it's a 49-inch ultra-wide monitor. You might want to check the product dimensions to make sure it will actually fit on your desk. At least in my case, the Freddy IKEA desk, it needs to fit in front of it. It's actually laughably large for my setup. Now, the monitor's resolution is what really stands out in comparison to some of its competitors. It runs at 5120 x 1440p. In other words, that's the equivalent of two 1440p 27-inch monitors sitting side by side next to each other, and therefore you get a 49-inch 1440p monitor. Past that, you've got a 1 millisecond quoted response time, and we'll get onto this in just a bit. It's the MPRT response time that's being quoted here because it's got a VA panel. It also runs up to 120 Hz. It also has VESA Display HDR 400 certification, and furthermore it's got FreeSync Premium Pro with a FreeSync range of 48 to 144 Hz, despite it being only a 120 Hz panel. Now elsewhere, what makes it stand out is its inputs. You've got two HDMI 2.0 inputs, two DisplayPort 1.4 inputs, and a USB Type-C input as well, which also delivers power to, let's say, a laptop. Furthermore, it's got three USB 3.2 ports. And why is this important? Well, because it's got a built-in KVM switch. For those who are not aware, a KVM switch will essentially allow you to plug in your peripherals, let's say your mouse or keyboard, directly into the monitor, whilst the monitor itself will be plugged into, let's say, a multitude of different computers. For example, a computer and laptop, and let's say a work PC as well. And therefore allows you to switch between the different computers, and while all preserving the same peripherals that are connected up to the monitor. Pretty nifty stuff. If you want more information about it, it will be down in the description below. As for audio, you've got a 3.5mm jack headphone output, which is also very useful because, again, you can utilize this in terms of the KVM switch, given that USB Type-C, DisplayPort and HDMI all can carry sound. And it's also got two 5-watt speakers built in, which I will say subjectively sound pretty good given the fact they're built-in monitor speakers. I will always recommend headphones, DAC or bookshelf speakers, but for those people who just want it for, let's say, basic notifications, then this will suffice given the fact that they're built into the monitor. Now, specs aside, in terms of build quality and design, I think AOC have really knocked it out the park over here. Not only do they include a little remote control, which is a rarity with most monitors because it allows you to control the monitor from afar, so let's say changing inputs, so that's pretty handy, and we'll touch upon this when it comes to the OSD section, but the monitor itself is also built really well because its stand provides it the height, tilt and pivot adjustments that you will need, and it means that it supports the 49-inch curved monitor pretty well, and therefore means you're not going to suffer from any wobbly sort of nature. You feel like you've got a premium product over here. It's also got a 3-silent borderless design and a nice sort of edge which along the bottom of the bezel with the AGON logo, which is stuck at the front of the monitor. And now we move on to the OSD, which can be accessed through a set of physical buttons, but in this case I'm using the remote because I just find it a lot more intuitive. Now, through the game settings, you can see there's a variety of different options, and here I just want to reference MBR mode and the overdrive mode, which is set on if you want to set it on boost. Now, these options will not be available if you were to set adaptive sync on, even if you're not using FreeSync or G-Sync enabled on your GPU settings. These modes will be grayed out or disabled altogether. You'll want to have low input lag mode enabled as well, because that's really handy, and we'll touch upon why in terms of the gaming section and then you've got the volume of the speakers. Now moving back, we've got the luminance. You'll again want to probably leave these by default, other than adjusting the brightness. I've just got it set to 0 for my camera to pick up. And then in terms of the image setup, this HDR mode will enable automatically when you have an HDR signal. So for example, when I was playing Destiny 2, this comes up and you'll have the display HDR mode enabled over here. Otherwise than that, if you're not using HDR, I would not recommend using it. And then in terms of color setup, I think most people will be pleasantly surprised at the overall color tone on the warm mode. However, it does have a dedicated sRGB mode and a user mode allowing you to adjust the RGB values. So if you use the sRGB mode, it's going to lock the brightness. So that's just the only thing worth kind of bearing in mind when it comes to using that outside of, let's say, warm user or normal mode. In terms of extra, you've got a few extra options, and you can see in terms of the display that's what sort of refresh rate and resolution. And then you've got the OSD setup, which is pretty comprehensive, and also the fact that you can set the USB as well if you want to enable it or disable it altogether. Useful for that KVM switch that I talked about. And now we get on to image quality. Now first off the bat, I do want to mention that there is a slight tail off in terms of text on the edges of the monitor. So if you're looking at the monitor pretty head on or from a sort of close distance and you look to your left or your right, what you'll notice is a kind of tail off of text. This will pretty much occur with any sort of image that's being shown, and something I thought I should highlight because it's something that I've noticed in the past with ultra-wide or super ultra-wide monitors. Now, past that, we have got its sRGB color gamut, and here the monitor hits 99.6% on a gamut coverage. However, is a little bit overzealous in terms of its gamut volume at 111.5%, and you can see over here that it a little bit extends in terms of its purple and reddish tones. So therefore it does hit the sRGB standard, but kind of goes a little bit overboard in this respect. Now what does this mean for color accuracy? Well, in terms of color accuracy, when the monitor was set to its sRGB mode and tested uncalibrated out the box against the sRGB color standard, it hits an average delta E of 1.88 with a maximum of 4.06. What really took me by surprise, which is kind of past the color accuracy, is its contrast ratio, which hits 2007:1. I do say by surprise, it is a VA panel, so one should expect high contrast ratio, but it's nice to see it on such a large monitor like this AOC monitor. Now the only thing worth bearing in mind here is that when you do set it to its sRGB mode, it will limit brightness to around 370 nits. However, its peak brightness can reach up to 450 nits, thus hitting the display HDR 400 standard, and we'll touch upon its HDR performance in a bit. Minimum brightness sits at around 105 nits, while if you were to enable MBR mode through the gaming section in terms of the OSD, this will limit brightness to 125 nits, so something to be mindful about if you're going to use that mode. As for brightness uniformity, I was absolutely gobsmacked at how well this monitor performed in this domain. Brightness uniformity was actually pretty excellent for an ultra-wide monitor, and even really good in comparison to other gaming monitors out there, be it ultra-wide or flat 24 or 27 inch monitors. So AOC have done a good job in this respect, and it came through when I was looking in terms of its backlight bleed, and of course it's a VA panel, so it's going to be less than an IPS, but in this respect I was still very impressed by how this monitor performed. It is very much panel lottery, so that's worth bearing in mind, but at least from the model that I received, I must say I am very much impressed. And now we move on to the most important part, at least in my opinion, and that's the gaming performance. Now first off, I wanted to test if it really did hit 120 Hz, and yes it did. It had no frame skipping issues, which was nice to see. In terms of my setup, I had an RTX 2080 Super connected over DisplayPort and running the monitor in its max resolution and refresh rate, thus 1440p at 120 Hz. Again, the super ultra wide 1440p resolution. The only thing worth bearing in mind over here in terms of its gaming is that not all games will support super ultra wide resolutions. It is still a little bit of a niche. While some games will support it, in my case Counter-Strike was fine, whilst Destiny 2 and also FIFA 21 had no issues either. There are going to be games out there that don't really support that super ultra wide resolution, so just something that you should be mindful about. Now in terms of its FreeSync Premium Pro inclusion, that worked flawlessly in my case with NVIDIA G-Sync because I've got an RTX 2080 Super connected over DisplayPort. Here I noticed no sort of stuttering or indeed flickering issues, and it was really impressive to see HDR, 1440p and G-Sync all working simultaneously while I was playing, let's say, a game like Destiny 2. Now, speaking of which, let's talk about its HDR performance. And I'm never a fan of any monitor that claims to have display HDR 400 standard, because in all honesty, other than accepting the signal, it's not really going to brighten up your display or brighten up your gaming experience. I would have liked to see HDR 600 or 1000 included. While that might have included a little bit of a price hike, I feel that it would have really standed out in comparison to some of its other competitors, which again stick to HDR 400 or don't even have HDR support regardless. Now, what I'm trying to say over here is that for PC gamers, I think that most will not really benefit from HDR. However, for those console gamers, you might see a little bit of benefit with its HDR inclusion. So it's not exactly pointless, but I just feel that it could have been bettered, and I think a lot of consumers would appreciate HDR 600 or above. Now, past that, it is worth bearing in mind that I did put this monitor through its paces on a competitive shooter such as Counter-Strike. Now, I would never suggest anyone to be playing on a super ultra-wide monitor playing a game like Counter-Strike. Nevertheless, my performance was absolutely abysmal when it came to playing Deathmatch, but it is here that I was able to see how this monitor was performing. And here the monitor's input lag is seriously impressive, very much like its predecessors from before in terms of its 2018 sibling, its smaller sibling should I say. In this respect, this 49-inch ultra-wide did a fantastic job in terms of input lag. Now, response time will depend in terms of your overdrive settings you use, but even on the boost mode setting, there was very little inverse ghosting, at which point I was benefiting from the best response time that this monitor could offer at no sort of, well, significant sort of problems when it came to inverse ghosting. So as a result, if I'm playing Counter-Strike, which again, I'm not sure why you would, but if I was playing Counter-Strike, I would run it on its boost mode setting. Now, in terms of competitive gaming, in terms of its response time, on its boost mode setting, as I mentioned, there was very little inverse ghosting, but when I moved to a more graphically intense game, such as Destiny 2, or indeed such as FIFA 21, here I noticed a little bit of purple trailing and a bit of little hazing that was occurring. As a result, I dialed down the overdrive setting, be it on the high mode or on the medium mode, and here still the monitor's response time was very much acceptable for playing more competitive games, and yet didn't incur as much inverse ghosting. Ultimately, this monitor was great in terms of its response time and extremely impressive in terms of its input lag, which really puts it among the top tier gaming monitors out there, and given the fact it's a super ultra wide, that's even more of a rarity to find nowadays, and in this respect I must say AOC have done a fantastic job. And this all leads me on to my verdict, and you can probably see where I'm going with this because throughout this review I've pretty much only sung praise for this monitor. And truthfully, that is because it's only got a few flaws. Its HDR performance could have been better, its color accuracy could have been a little bit more color accurate, but it's still very much impressive for a super or ultra wide monitor, and its buttons are a little bit finicky to access the OSD, but on the plus side you can counteract that by using the remote. Elsewhere, the monitor does a fantastic job. It's well built, it's got all the right features that you're going to need. It's even got a KVM switch for those people who want to not only use it for gaming, but for one that they could use as for productivity. So if you're going to be a gamer, but you're also going to use it as your work PC, then you can do so and increase productivity. So ultimately, this ticks a lot of boxes, and as a result gets my Best Buy award, something that I would only award a product where I thought I would buy it myself or would be worthy of my recommendation to anyone watching this video. So that's just my honest, unbiased, unpaid thoughts about it. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe to see more from the channel, and of course favourite and share to always help the channel grow. I've been Totally Dubbed, take care, and bye bye.